Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Chaotic Entertainment. I'm your host, Daniel Clark, and today we're going to be discussing a couple of subjects that seem to be recurring themes in the gaming industry. Themes that, in the current discussion of video games, I feel aren't given the level of nuance and open conversation that I feel they deserve. Today I'll be discussing gatekeeping and entitlement, two subjects that no doubt you've seen brought up and, rather than discussed, screeched about on Reddit, Twitter, and above all else, Reset Era, the horrid barren wasteland devoid of anything that may resemble a constructive, meaningful, or challenging conversation. After all, you can't have a proper echo chamber if someone with an idea that vaguely resembles independent thought is allowed in your discussion, so it's best to just block and ban any and all dissenting opinions. I guess. The reason that I've chosen these topics is because I feel they're actually quite important. They often seem to be a part of the conversation, as it were, but rarely, if ever, seem to be the focus. So today I'll take a moment and thoroughly talk them through and provide my thoughts on them. I have to stress that everything you hear today is just an opinion, so obviously take it with a grain of salt and reach your own conclusions, please. Our first order of business is gatekeeping, a term that is defined by Oxford Dictionary as the activity of controlling and usually limiting general access to something. It's a serviceable definition, so it's the one I'm going to use for this video. Gatekeeping is a somewhat complicated subject, which is strange when you consider how simple the premise of it is. The premise is this: there is a thing people really like. Other people ask if they can join that thing, the first group of people say no, and life goes on. At first glance, it seems rather silly. After all, if you love something, you'd obviously want it to grow, expand, and be successful, yes? Well, that's not entirely as black and white as you might think. The thing about gaming is it oftentimes will generate communities. The more niche or less mainstream the title or genre, the more tightly knit that community will tend to be. Now, I rant a lot about my dislike of echo chambers or lack of diversity of thoughts and opinions, but my disdain doesn't really apply to fandoms. Marketing and game development tends to rely heavily, or at least it should, on listening to what fans of a product want. It would be asinine of me to demand people stop agreeing with each other about what they like or dislike about a certain game, but these niche communities do tend to be made up of like-minded people with a shared passion. This group tends to be filled with original supporters of the game, the very people who helped fund it and get it off the ground in the first place. They end up being the target audience, or at least they make up the core of it. Now, the gaming industry is just that, an industry. If you're not making money and taking in new players, you're doing it wrong. That's economics 101. But what happens when you have new players or potential players who are demanding changes be made just to specifically accommodate them? And not a mass majority or anything of that sort, but rather an extremely vocal minority of people who have had little to no interaction with the game in question, or even the genre in question. And I don't mean demands such as colorblind options, font sizes, or subtitles. More options, especially of that sort, are very much the sort of thing I would hope everyone would root for. No, what if these demands were for drastic, major changes to the gameplay or plot of the game? Specifically changes that would directly harm or even kill the enjoyment of it by the people that are already die-hard fans of it. Demands for the removal of certain gameplay or story elements that are a fundamental part of the game and are responsible for creating the community and audience that are already there. Changes that the bulk of the core audience is largely opposed to. For a somewhat recent example of this, look no further than the absolute madhouse that was the Sekiro Needs an Easy Mode debacle. For those who don't know what this is, here's the short version. There were a handful of folks complaining that the difficulty of Sekiro, a game by From Software, the creators of Dark Souls, was making them feel left out, and they were unable to enjoy the game because there was no easy mode. In fact, they felt it was unfair that the difficulty, the major focus and appeal of From Software titles, was excluding them. Now again, it was only a small number of people. This wouldn't have been much of an issue were it not for the fact that this minority was made far louder by gaming journalists such as David Thier, I don't know how to pronounce your name, I'm sorry, and Steve Spawn, parroting the same talking points. The reason this is an issue is the core of the game's playstyle and mechanics are based around just how brutal the game can be. And while I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, especially Steve, and assume this comes from a place of concern rather than a way for games journalists to weasel out of the fact they're incompetent at their job and looking for an easy way out of proper reviews, The idea that such a well-established franchise was demonized for making the type of game they're so heavily praised for making is the sort of thing you'd expect to only hear in a poorly written joke. It would be like getting mad at a florist for selling flowers. I can't believe I have to repeat this statement once again, but video games are not only a product with a target audience, they're also art. I get demanding better frame rates, better performance, better models, but in Sekiro's case, the difficulty is a massive part of what sets the tone and atmosphere of the overall experience. The challenge and tension of what lies in wait around the next corner that game offers is impossible without that sense of vulnerability. The knowledge that making a mistake or refusing to learn from that mistake is all it takes to send you back to the last spawn point. Such an atmosphere, such a vision is impossible if changes to the difficulty are made willy-nilly or if the playstyle is heavily altered. Changing difficulty isn't as easy as change a few numbers, and even if it was, if you play Souls games without any fear because you know you'll be perfectly fine, then you're not going to get the intended experience that the designer needs you to have in order to appreciate it in the first place. A common criticism of this view is, well, gaming is for everyone. And it is. Casual players or those with disabilities deserve to enjoy the hobby just like everyone else. But while gaming is indeed for everyone, not every game is. To refuse to change the game for others was seen as gatekeeping. It's a strangely common assertion used when games won't change for the sake of people who haven't even invested in it in the first place. Inadequate representation is gatekeeping. No easy mode is gatekeeping. Expecting someone to hold their own in competitive games is gatekeeping. But honestly, what this all sounds like is the way you have fun isn't ideal for me. This is unacceptable. Cease what you're doing and change your hobby and passion for me. These demands are based almost entirely on self-interest and the unwillingness of some people to accept that they're not the target audience of something, and that something out there doesn't revolve around them. New titles are released constantly. Not all of them are going to be ideal for everyone. I understand that it's infuriating to feel excluded. I dealt with it my entire childhood, but not everything is for everyone. If you can't play a game because it's too hard, play a different game. If you can't stomach a game because the story disturbs you, or you can't see yourself in the characters for superficial, arbitrary reasons, launch a different title. Demanding changes be made to accommodate you, especially at the cost of alienating core audiences or compromising on an artistic vision, is the epitome of entitlement. Which brings us to our second subject, entitlement. A phrase that appears to have lost all meaning or impact when discussing gamers and their respective communities. For the sake of uniformity and defining our terms, we'll be using the Oxford definition for this subject as well. Entitled, believing oneself to be inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. Entitled gamers. Gamers are entitled. You're all entitled man babies tend to be the repeated call to arms that the absolute worst voices surrounding the gaming community love. Let's dissect the idea behind entitlement for a moment, shall we? For starters, the implications of such an accusation are that one is acting in such a way that suggests they feel they're owed something and are both morally and factually wrong for doing so. Yet the phrase entitled is not inherently bad. There are absolutely times when people are entitled to things. If you pay for a product, you are absolutely entitled to receiving that product. If you pay someone for a service, you are entitled to that person's labor. Demanding to receive something that you have paid for does not make you unfairly entitled. It makes you an average person with basic understandings of consumers' rights. Then there are times when a producer may offer something that consumers are either displeased with or simply have no interest in buying, so much so that they openly voice their concerns. Statements such as, "You removed this feature, so I have no interest in your game," or "You promised this, but you failed to deliver on it," will be commonplace, though they may not be so politely worded. In these circumstances, it seems to be almost infuriatingly popular for people to call the upset or disappointed consumers entitled or whiny, as if publishers or developers are somehow they themselves entitled to people's money, and it's the duty of moral busybody activists to enforce that right. Now, you have to ask yourself, where does this seem to come from? Where are these people who seem to know better than the incensed consumers coming from? What is their motivation? My theory is that they do this simply because it's popular in their circles, in their cliques and activist groups. Each of their Twitter bios looks like this. I'm not sure if that's part of the equation or not, I'm just saying it seems to be a recurring theme here. In regards to the actual accusations of entitlement, there's a time and place where I absolutely feel it's warranted. It's one thing when it's in regards to the scummiest people on the internet sending death threats or genuine verbal abuse to a developer or a publisher over damn video games. If news about a video game not meeting your expectations is all it takes for you to threaten the physical well-being of others, then yes, you are being entitled, but that's far from the worst thing that's clearly wrong with you. But I don't understand how people have gotten this idea in their head that the poor defenseless multi-million-dollar company needs protection from the customers they have either let down or blatantly lied to. The go-to comment in response to criticism from your average gamer is to call them entitled or toxic. What's so ironic about this is I've observed so many of the same people rant and scream when a game does something they find personally distasteful or when a game approaches a subject in a way they find appalling. But that's fine because they're not being entitled. They're having a discussion or they're standing on the right side of history. I have to ask, how can a person who is upset with the launch of Fallout 76 and all the various missteps it took be considered toxic, yet the people screaming at CD Projekt Red for not approaching trans issues in the very specific way they demand is not either of those things? I get that one has ties to real life issues and controversies, but the opinion of this matter is so spread out that I struggle to see how one could declare themselves a moral authority on it. Other than clear cognitive dissonance, it's largely due to the fact that people tend to either project in the most extreme of ways or because they've become the sort who mindlessly contribute to the flood of accusations of entitlement as just another means to detract from people they don't like. This mindset seems to be entirely focused on how can I lash out at people I dislike rather than how can I convey an actual discussion and promote my ideas. Of course, you can't actually have a discussion with most of these people. They'll block you the moment you disagree with them or have you banned by moderators. There's almost something beautiful and poetic about someone calling others entitled and then demanding that no one challenge or critique their particular worldview. Again, I'm not blind to the shortcomings of the people in my hobby. There are some toxic, awful people in gaming. It's not a secret, it's pretty much a meme at this point. But it's not so rampant and widespread that I deem it fair to paint everyone who is a gamer with the same brush, especially when it seems to be so common for gaming's biggest detractors to be just as foul, if not worse. To wrap up the subject, I pose the following questions. How can someone refusing to buy a game because they don't care for how it looks be entitled, but the person who demands games and artists stop creating art they don't care for isn't? How can someone unironically call people man babies for being upset a publisher lied to them, then in the same breath brigade an artist for drawing an art style they don't like? How can you possibly rant about how terrible people are for not mindlessly buying a product and having the nerve to say why, and then harass and scream at developers that make games that offend your delicate sensibilities and not call yourself a hypocrite? The only answers I seem to be able to find involve people being intellectually dishonest and caring more about standing against people they dislike, rather than standing for something on a basis of morals. To the people I've ranted about today, if for some reason you're still watching this, I'd like to reward you with a few words of wisdom. Developers with artistic vision do not have to change that vision for your benefit or to make your inclusion a possibility. If you don't like it, you don't have to buy it, and you won't be entitled for making that choice. Likewise, just because someone is displeased with a company's product and is refusing to purchase it does not make them entitled either. If you don't like something, don't buy it. Don't demand it be ruined for others just for your sake. After all, wouldn't that make you the entitled man baby? Or they baby? I don't make assumptions about these things. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Chaotic Entertainment. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope you've at least learned something from this. If you have enjoyed this, please leave a like down below and consider subscribing for future videos. I'll see you all in the next video.